Good morning, Rise and Shine Vincennes, 8:34 the time. And at 4:30 this morning, I did not realize we were going to be teaching government class on the show today, but we will be doing that. Joining me on the phone line now is 8th District Democratic Party Chair Dave Crooks. Good morning, Dave. How are you? I think I lost Dave on a phone line. Let me try this again. Let me do it this way. Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay.
Still here. Hi, Justin.
Good morning, technology, when it does not want to work properly. It is what it is.
It is.
Well, so the reason we have Dave on is Dave is a former legislature member in the State House, serving back in the 90s through, I believe, 2008. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that's a good guess there. 96 to 2008 is when I served.
And to be clear, at that point in time, for the most of that time, you had Democratic governors until the mid-2000s with Mitch Daniels.
Correct. That happened in 04.
Right. And back then, and the way it is now, redistricting typically happens once every 10 years, typically after the census, correct?
Yeah, basically the Constitution says, when the census is released, every 10 years, we redraw the districts based on, making sure the population is equal as possible in all the legislative districts, not just the congressional side, but the Senate and House districts. And you're supposed to keep it not only equal and balanced, but you're trying to make everything as compact as possible so you're not splitting communities of interest. Gerrymandering has been going on since Governor Gary did it back in Massachusetts, many moons ago. And yes, both sides have done gerrymandering. What people seem to misunderstand right now with what the president is doing, especially with our state lawmakers, he's whining and dining them tonight in the White House just to try to convince them to do the redistricting way ahead of schedule. Donald Trump knows he's got a problem. When this next midterm is up, and it happened to him in his first term, he lost, 40-some congressional seats to the Democrats?
I believe so.
He knows how tough that was to manage his second part of his first term because he had Nancy Pelosi as speaker, and he couldn't just tell her where to go and what to do because Nancy would never take that from Donald Trump. But anyway, it did slow his legislative initiatives down, which is how the founders wanted our Constitution and democracy to work. He overreached in his first term, just like he's doing now. He's trying to figure out a way from bleeding seats. So they're basically doing what I believe is purely unconstitutional, not only unethical and wrong. They're trying to steal Frank Mervan's congressional seat in the District of Northwest Indiana, and that district over time has become more balanced because you've got a lot of people from Cook County in Illinois and other parts of northeastern Chicago that have escaped to Indiana for housing, and the president makes it sound like it's a complete mess, and yeah, I'm sure in parts of Southside Chicago it is pretty scary at night, like most larger cities, but it's nowhere near what the president has been embellishing on national TV to come up with a new segment for his reality show in his mind, I guess is how I would call it. But if you look back in history about 31 years, and for those of you that are at least as old as me or older, the Republicans in the Indiana House tried to redistrict in 93, or I think it was 93. John Gregg was the minority leader at that time, and John was able to stop it then by breaking the quorum. Because Republicans were upset that they had a 50-50 tie, and they wanted to redraw the districts then so there would be a stronger Republican advantage. Stronger minds prevailed, and they just worked it out, and John brought enough attention to it that it didn't happen. It was wrong then, it's wrong now. I mean, you do this every 10 years when the census is released, and then you go back to work. To keep redrawing lines every couple of years because you're worried that voters may throw you out of office, so let's pick new voters so they can't do that. It's pretty damn disappointing to a guy like me who's been in public service for a long time, and you're supposed to be there for all the right reasons. And right now the Republicans are doing everything they can to keep power because they know they're going to have a real problem next November.
Well, and you mentioned that the gerrymandering, more or less, is along party lines, and basically to explain gerrymandering for those that may need the education. What is gerrymandering exactly?
Okay, so let's try to imagine, let's take Vincennes Township. Vincennes Township's got a lot of different precincts. Let's say if you knew that there were a bunch of Republicans that lived near the old Elks and on the north side of Vincennes, I assume that leans more Republican than it does Democrat. If you were trying to draw, let's say, 4 precincts in just Vincennes, you might be able to draw the lines to favor one party or the other if you grab a certain portion of a county or community that leans heavily one way or the other. Think about what's going on nationally. The parties have realigned. And when a lot of people say what happened to the Democrat Party or the Republican Party, they're not your grandpa's parties from 30, 40, 50 years ago. Issues have changed. Voters have changed. Democrats seem to be doing exceptionally well in suburban, urban areas. The polling shows that if they're higher educated, they tend to be voting more Democratic these days. Democrats still are struggling to connect again with just typical voters, and there's so much mass confusion out there with all the misinformation. You mentioned that you're on a digital channel right now. There's a flood of them available right now. People don't know what to believe. But when it comes to redistricting, I was in the legislature back in 2001, and when they looked at my district, which, by the way, was about a 41% Republican or Democrat district, I wasn't even supposed to win once, let alone 6 times. But they would put your district up on a map or up on a screen, and you could look at all your townships and counties and see what your district looks like. And let's say back then, I think I had 1 township in Gibson County in Columbia City. That was a highly Democratic town at that time. They took it out of my district because it was only 1 township in that county, and I told them they ought to give me Washington Township in Washington, even though it was more Republican. We did it anyway because I should be the state rep for the southern half of Washington Township when I was serving, not just Columbia in Oakland City by skipping part of Washington. I hope this makes sense. But I'm trying to get everybody to understand gerrymandering is basically the science of politicians choosing their voters instead of voters choosing them. You can almost scientifically predict the election these days by just the geography and voting trends. For example, I'm convinced it happened back in 2020 when Joe Biden beat Donald Trump. No matter what Donald Trump says, he lost that election fair and square. The data shows that it was pretty clear that Biden was going to beat Trump a year out. But the data also shows that Biden was on a path to losing, which obviously Vice President Harris did, because the data basically showed the trend was changing and people were upset, and you can almost scientifically take that data in all these districts and kind of get a pretty good idea which way people are going to vote. The metrics tighter than you might think. There's no wave elections anymore like we had back in 1974 in the Watergate era, for example. Although I will say Democrats like me are trying to set the table in hopes we could have another 74 type year in which Richard Nixon at that time was lying to the country, which we've got a president lying right now to us. And we need to make sure that we've got balance of power and our own checks and balances, because right now, and I would say this if the Democrats were in charge completely, when one party has complete power, watch out. And right now, here's what's going on. Mike Braun is being pressured by Donald Trump to convince the legislature to redraw the lines ahead of schedule because he wants an extra seat or 2 in hopes of losing the midterms next year. And Mike Braun's in a pickle as governor because I keep hearing he's a decent guy overall, but he sometimes has a tough time making a tough decision. But what Mike's dealing with right now as governor, you got the president in his ear saying, come on, Mike, do this. Meantime, tonight in D.C., it's my understanding there's top leadership officials from the Republican Party in both the Indiana House and the Senate. They're flying to Washington, D.C. for dinner with the president tonight so he can convince them to basically break our state constitution and redraw the districts ahead of schedule in hopes that they might take all the congressional districts in Indiana, which would be 9 instead of 7 out of 9. The 2 congressional districts that Democrats have right now is basically 3/4 of Marion County, and that's Andre Carson's district that he's represented for a while. And It would be hard to make Marion County Republican because over time it's drifted very Democratic. But yet you've got communities like Carmel, Indiana, Noblesville, Zionsville. They've been trending very blue and very Democratic. But that's your suburban, urban professionals, highly educated. That seems to be the trend the Democratic Party is doing right now. They can do very well in larger cities. You look at Indiana's 92 counties, Democratic strength seems to be in about 5 counties right now, while the rest of the counties are so rural. They definitely have trended more Republican. But back to my story about the map, you can throw those districts on the screen. You can look at exactly the trends in population, and if you wanted to move a township or a county to a different district, within seconds it recalculates the numbers, and you know exactly if you've got enough people in that particular district to make that fairly even. The process has been abused. It's going to continue to be abused. I mean, I always thought 2 wrongs don't make it right, and I hated to see California play the same game as Texas, but I don't think Democrats have any choice right now to fight fire with fire. But usually when we give the oath of office for our elected leaders, including our president, they're supposed to uphold both the state constitution and the federal constitution. But what greatly concerns me right now, Tyson, very little attention being made to our laws, norms, and constitution right now with this current leadership and current president.
Well, and you mentioned redistricting and other candidates. What would this do potentially with the current 8th district, which includes Vincennes, Terre Haute, Evansville, where you just had a candidate declare their candidacy for the 8th district Congress seat going up against Mark Mesmer?
Yeah, one of the concerns I have is being a political operative in the back room, so to speak, trying to, train and lead these candidates so they can go out and represent us. I'm worried that since we've already got our candidate now endorsed, she's from Evansville, Mary Allen. You can check her out at maryallenforcongress.com. Republicans could, if they wanted to, they could draw the 8th to where they could even draw her out of the 8th, but keep Mark Mesmer in maybe a different part of the district. I don't know if that's going to happen, but if that happens, I will say that it just shows you how obvious the corruption on this is right now. They'll do anything and everything to pick up a congressional seat. And when you look at what's happening to our republic, think about someone like Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt's my favorite Republican, but he also not only did a good job leading the country, he protected natural resources, got our national parks going, and he knew that you had to separate industry from government. You don't want to have corporations with unbridled power and no checks in place. Well, if he could come back and see what America looks like today, and not only was the richest businessman in the country, really the world, Elon Musk, was making significant chops and cuts to our government through this Doge effort, which we've already figured out 95% of the figures that President Trump and his allies told us they were cutting was completely false and absolute lies. But just imagine if Teddy Roosevelt could come back and see how this process is working, he would be ashamed and he wouldn't believe it, because we've pretty much turned over our government to the highest bidder. Billionaires and those with big dollars are running our government right now, and they're behind the scenes doing everything they can to try to keep the power play right where it's at, which is in favor of Donald Trump and the Republicans. And when you look deep down at the policies right now, I would argue that they're not in the best interest of typical people who live in places like the 8th District or Southwest Indiana. But nevertheless, this is more than a policy debate right now. This is something that should not be happening in Indiana or anywhere across the country, to do a mid-decade redistricting. And again, for the talking points the other side keeps throwing at us, oh, the Democrats do it. No, we haven't done this mid-decade unless there's maybe a court-contested particular district that there's been a lawsuit over. And we've had that happen in places like North Carolina, for example, to where they didn't follow the Federal Voting Act's law. And you clearly got to, make sure that there's equal representation, not only by geography, but by population and by ethnic minorities at times. Indianapolis is a great example of that. It's clearly a Democratic city now. Even when Jefferson Shreve ran against Joel Hogshead back in 23, he spent $20 million of his own personal wealth, but he still only got 1/3 of the vote, because no matter how you shape it, Marion County is a Democrat county. But yet Jefferson Shreve got all that name ID that he paid for with his own personal wealth. I think he sold for over $500 million some kind of a storage company. He got so much name ID from all those checks he wrote for his campaign that he's now the new congressman who replaced Mike Pence's brother, Greg. So that notoriety that he paid for got him a congressional seat, even though his intent was to be the mayor of Indianapolis. So again, geography is key, but right now this is a game that's being played by Donald Trump and the National Republicans. They are afraid about all the policy changes that are coming and what they claim is the big, beautiful bill, but there's nothing beautiful about it unless you're rich. This is going to have some very negative consequences, not only by making the debt larger than it already is, and I can't believe that we're going to throw another $2 or $3 trillion at our debt because of the way this legislation was crafted. But you're going to have a lot of average people who, you need Medicaid at times. If you don't have money, you don't have coverage. There are going to be people that are going to be denied, added to the Medicaid list because there's just not going to be enough money to go around. And it's not just for people that are destitute or poor. I mean, sometimes grandma runs out of money when she's a widow. And if they can't get her on Medicaid to go to a nursing home, maybe you're going to have to move her into your back bedroom, is what these kind of policy things are different. And sometimes that works if grandma's healthy. But I'm telling you, this Medicaid nightmare is going to bite a lot of people in a very negative way. It's going to cost lives because when you don't have health care, people get sicker quicker and they die because there's no way to resolve it if they don't have coverage or money. So this is a very complicated mess policy-wise that I think is going to bite the Republicans in a year when people realize, my goodness, I've lost my Medicaid. If you're on the Affordable Care Act and if you get an affordable payment because you do get some subsidies from the federal government to help pay for those expensive premiums, those policies are going away January 1st. You're going to have to just pay for whatever that policy costs, no matter what your income level might be. It's going to make it really unaffordable for a lot of people, and that's going to put more people on the sick list and running into our hospitals, overloading the emergency rooms. So I don't think it was a very careful policy when it comes to what's in the tax bill, the big, beautiful bill. There's so many different pieces of we used to call them a Christmas tree back in the state legislature, when you just roll so many different things into a bill that it's hard to explain because it's so full of gifts for whoever. But unfortunately, that's where that bill is at. And then the reckless trade policy on tariffs. I mean, you can't send every country on the globe a letter threatening them. That's not how you do business, but that's what this president has done. Our biggest trading partners, Mexico and Canada, they're mad at us because we're treating them like some evil stepchild when they're not. So I think this is all going to just roll into a big, tough election next year. Republicans already know they're in trouble when people finally wake up to all the policy that's been passed already and future policies being passed. This is why they're focused on choosing their voters instead of voters choosing them. Because I'm convinced, Dustin, when people finally understand all the harm that this current administration is doing to Hoosiers, they're going to get angry and they're going to go vote against these people because they're not working in our best interest. They're working in the special interest, and we've had enough of that. People are hurting. They're having, I paid $3.49 for a gallon of gas yesterday, and that was in Ohio, and it continued all the way through Indiana. You can't tell me that prices are cheaper right now compared to a year ago. Everything's going up. Ground beef, 40% higher from 1 year ago today. Utilities, 40% higher than they were 1 year ago today. People's incomes are not going up high enough to meet the challenges of higher costs. And one of the reasons that Donald Trump won, he assured everybody he would end the Ukraine war in 1 day. It's still going on, and there's no solution on the table. And everything is still higher in prices, and I think that's one of the reasons Donald Trump and the Republicans are rushing to try to do this scheme of redistricting, because they realize when voters wake up and see all the damage that they've really caused to this country, they're going to want to vote some of these rascals out. So if you can take a Victoria Sparks, let's say she's got about a 55% Republican district, and make that a little bit stronger, she might be able to offset a challenger. But yet, if they try to help take Andre Carson's district in Indianapolis or the one in northwest Indiana, they'll have to make the other districts around the state a little bit more democratic, and that makes a district like 8, perhaps a little bit tighter in a high turnout race. But what people have to remember, part of the issues too right now, the voter turnout is lousy. Indiana is one of the few states that still allows straight party voting, but we're also 50th in voting participation in this country. We beat the District of Columbia, just so you know. That's sad. About 400,000 Hoosiers who typically vote Democratic last fall, they didn't even show up and vote. So Democrats have our own challenges with our brand, but right now we're having a tough time overcoming the branding that the president and the other side is constantly tossing at us. They seem to be defining us better than we're defining ourselves, even though their definition, I think, is completely bull and not accurate. But I think it's part of the overall problems that Democrats are having nationally. We're having a tough time defining our brand because there's so much media out there now that's just bashing away. I mean, my goodness, we had so much disinformation that's been out there for so long. I say it started back when Rush Limbaugh went on the air, and it's gotten worse ever since.
Well, one thing you mentioned a little bit ago was if the gerrymandering, for example, was basically put in place, mentioned most likely Democrats would be going after the redistricting and gerrymandering as unconstitutional?
Well, I mean, there's so many things that Donald Trump and the Republicans have been doing right now that's unconstitutional. It's hard to get some traction on that. The sheer volume of activity is just kind of hard to overcome right now, and people don't. I mean, unfortunately, not enough people in the country have read the Constitution, let alone understand it. But if you take time to look at both the Indiana and the state constitution, you can clearly say that there's overreach happening right now on the redistricting. It's clear as a bell. We do this once every 10 years following the release of the census. I don't know how our founders could have made it more clear in Indiana, but yet we've got a governor who's ready to let this con man named Donald Trump just to roll over all of our standards and norms and constitution and laws and try to win one for him because he's worried he's going to lose to Congress and he doesn't want to be a loser. I mean, this guy is focused on him more than he is the whole country's best interest right now, and I wish people would wake up and realize that because there are qualified reports that are out there in the past couple of weeks where the Trump family has made over $3.4 billion in personal gain since he's become the president in his first and now the start of his second term. And it looks like he's going to be much more aggressive with not only his need for personal wealth and fame and gain, but I think it's going to be just hard to describe what things are going to look like at the end of his term, and will he even leave at the end of his term? And with some of the behavior that he's using with bringing National Guard troops into Washington, D.C., that's all for show. And that's just tragic that he's playing those kind of games. Think about all these National Guard families. They're happy to go help in times of need of a tornado or a crisis, but they're not trained or meant for law enforcement policing. So you got people from our state and other states around the country that have got to stop what they're doing, their normal jobs, or they're running small businesses, to go stand around the corners of Washington, D.C. for a photo opportunity because the president wants to make himself look tough on crime. People need to wake the hell up. There's just so much going on right now that is not going to be in their best interest for the long haul. But when so many people are blindly putting their faith in one American, and even his own party leaders are not even bucking him, and one great example of that will be tonight when there's dinner at the White House, and there's legislative leaders, probably from Speaker Houston from the House, Senator Bray, the pro tem leader, and a handful of other leaders, probably those who control the Elections Committee, and probably the Rules Committee. And even though I'm hearing from reliable sources that most of the legislative leaders from both caucuses do not want to have a special session for this, I don't see how they're going to be able to turn down Donald Trump tonight. Nobody seems to know how to tell him no from his own side. The first aggressive punch in the nose I've seen to the president lately happened yesterday with Governor J.D. Pritzker of Illinois. That man is a hero in my mind, a self-made billionaire. That's what a billionaire looks like. He owns His family owns Hyatt hotels, for example, but he got into public service late in life because he was tired of seeing all the craziness and what was happening on the sidelines. And he's led Illinois to better days, and I think there's continued improvement headed in that state. But sometimes you just have to just call it what it is. And if you missed J.D. Pritzker's speech yesterday, find it and play it back, because that man had every ounce of information and evidence that anyone should need to know what this president and majority party are doing. They're violating the Constitution. They're lying. They are violating every norm and standard of this republic. And it's time for Americans to wake up and realize what is happening. Because if we don't, we're not going to have a democracy anymore. We're going to have an authoritarian, fascist type operation, which we're witnessing now. And I don't see how that's going to be good for Hoosiers, Dustin. So I'm quite alarmed by how fragile I think our state and federal government is right now. We have policy that's being made that clearly is going to put the country in worse times by higher debt, higher prices, and I think Hoosiers are going to continue to struggle, and that's not what they voted for last November.
Dave, thank you for your time. We're running up on the clock right now. It's been a pleasure to talk with you, learn about gerrymandering, and talk about what's going on with potential redistricting in the state of Indiana.
Happy to do it. If they want to go to our Facebook page, it's 8th INDEMS, so like the number 8, TH, and then INDEMS. And our website is indems.org. Check it out. And Dustin, you have a great day.
Thank you, Dave Crooks. And that wraps it up today for Rise and Shine Vincennes. For Chris Richardson in the newsroom, I'm Dustin Fuller. For Dave Crooks on the phone line as well, have a great rest of your Tuesday.